What happens when a Hollywood star known for his charm, humor, and laid-back charisma suddenly feels cornered on live television and decides he's had enough? What happens when a friendly interview turns into a moment so tense the studio air feels like it might crack? Before we begin, make sure you subscribe to The Truth Narrator, hit that like button, and comment below where you're watching from, because stories like this only get more explosive as they unfold. The studio lights of The View burned bright, hotter than usual, reflecting off polished floors and glossy mugs lined neatly across the table. Applause rolled in waves as the audience welcomed Chris Pratt, America's favorite everyman turned blockbuster star. He walked out smiling, waving, that familiar grin plastered on his face. The grin that had sold billions in box office tickets and convinced the world he was just a regular guy who somehow made it big. But behind that smile, something subtle shifted. A tightening around the eyes. A breath held a fraction longer than normal. Chris had done hundreds of interviews, but something about this one felt off. Joy Behar leaned forward in her chair, glasses perched low on her nose, a half-smile playing on her lips. She watched him closely, the way a seasoned talk show veteran watches a guest, not just listening, but probing. The conversation began easily enough. Laughter. A joke about superhero diets. Chris laughed along, relaxed his shoulders, leaned into the rhythm. The audience chuckled. Everything felt safe. Predictable. But live television has a way of changing direction without warning. Joy tilted her head, tapping her cue card against the table. "So Chris," she said, her tone light but her eyes sharp, "you've been very open about your beliefs over the years. Some people say that makes you controversial." The word lingered in the air. Controversial. Chris blinked once. Just once. His smile didn't disappear, but it froze like a photograph held too long. "I think everyone has beliefs," he replied calmly. "I've always tried to treat people with respect." Whoopi Goldberg shifted in her seat, sensing the change in temperature. Sunny Hostin glanced toward the audience, then back at Chris. The laughter track never came. The room grew quiet. Joy pressed on. "But when your beliefs influence your public platform," she said, "don't you think it's fair for people to question whether that platform makes others feel excluded?" The audience murmured. A low ripple. Chris inhaled slowly. In his mind, years of headlines flashed by, tweets taken out of context, opinion pieces dissecting his faith, his politics, his friendships. He had learned to dodge, to smile, to redirect. That's what PR training teaches you. But this didn't feel like a dodgeable moment. This felt like a trap closing gently, politely, but firmly. "I don't believe in excluding anyone," he said, his voice steady, though something harder had entered it. "That's never been who I am." Joy raised an eyebrow. Some would disagree. There it was. The camera zoomed slightly closer, capturing the tension in high definition. Chris shifted in his chair, clasped his hands together, then released them. The charm was still there, but now it was strained, like a rope pulled too tight. "Joy," he said, choosing his words carefully. "With respect, a lot of what people disagree with is based on assumptions. Things I never said. Things I never did." Joy leaned back, crossing her arms. "But you understand why people might feel uncomfortable, right?" The audience held its breath. Chris looked out toward them, scanning faces, some sympathetic, some curious, some already judging. He thought about his kids, about the responsibility of being a public figure, about how many times he had swallowed frustration to keep the peace. And then something inside him shifted. "I understand people have opinions," he said, his voice firmer now. "What I don't understand is being told who I am by people who've never sat across from me." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the crowd. Joy smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Well, that comes with fame." Chris nodded once. Slowly. "So does being human." The words landed heavier than expected. Whoopi cleared her throat, about to jump in, but Joy wasn't done. "Do you think celebrities should be held accountable," Joy asked, "for the messages they send, intentionally or not?" Chris turned fully toward her now. The smile was gone. Completely. "I think everyone should be accountable," he said, "including interviewers." The studio froze. You could feel it, the moment when a line was crossed, not loudly, not explosively, but undeniably. The audience gasped, some clapped nervously, unsure whether they were allowed to react. Sunny's eyes widened. Whoopi's hand hovered above the table. Joy let out a short laugh. "Are you saying I'm being unfair?" Chris didn't hesitate. "I'm saying this feels less like a conversation and more like an accusation." Silence. The cameras captured everything. The tight jaw, the straightened spine, the way Chris leaned forward, no longer defensive but resolute. Years of being labeled, dissected, and misunderstood had piled up behind that moment, and now they pressed against his chest, demanding release. "This is live TV," Joy said coolly. "We ask tough questions. And I give honest answers," Chris shot back. "But honesty goes both ways." A murmur swept through the audience, louder now. This wasn't playful banter. This was real. Raw. Unscripted. Chris exhaled, his voice lowering. "I came here to talk about my work. To have a conversation. Not to be put on trial for who people think I am." For a split second, Joy looked surprised. Then defensive. Then thoughtful. The room hung suspended between them, like a held note in a symphony, waiting to see which way it would resolve. And that's when everyone realized this interview was no longer under anyone's control. Not the producers. Not the hosts. Not even Chris Pratt himself. This was just the beginning. The silence didn't last long, but it felt endless. In that fragile pause after Chris's words, the studio seemed to shrink, the bright lights pressing down harder, the audience shifting in their seats like witnesses to something they weren't sure they were supposed to see. This wasn't a movie set where tension was choreographed and cut on command. This was live. Raw. Unfiltered. Whoopi finally moved, placing her hand flat on the table, her voice calm but firm. "Okay, let's take a breath here," she said, trying to steady the room. "We're just talking." Chris nodded, but his eyes never left Joy. "I know," he said. "That's all I'm asking for." Joy adjusted her glasses, her jaw tightening slightly. She wasn't used to guests pushing back like this. Not so directly, not with this much conviction. "Chris," she replied, "when you're a public figure, people are going to ask you uncomfortable questions. That's not an attack. That's accountability." The word hit him again. Accountability. Chris leaned back, running a hand over his beard, the movement slow, deliberate. He could feel his heart pounding now, a dull thrum in his ears. He thought about all the times he'd laughed things off, nodded politely, played the agreeable guest. That version of him felt very far away. Accountability for what exactly? He asked. For believing something quietly? For not performing my beliefs in a way that makes everyone comfortable? The audience murmured again, louder this time. A few claps broke out, quickly hushed by the uncertainty of the moment. Sunny Hostin leaned forward, sensing the growing divide. "I think what Joy is saying," she offered, "is that when fans feel hurt or excluded, they want answers." Chris turned toward Sunny, softening just a touch. "I get that," he said, "and I care about people feeling hurt. But I can't answer for rumors or projections. I can only answer for my actions." Joy shook her head. "But silence can be an action too." That was the spark. Chris's posture changed instantly. He sat up straighter, his voice rising just enough to cut through the noise. "Or silence can be respect," he said. "Not everything needs to be debated on social media or dissected on daytime TV." A sharp ooh rippled through the crowd. The camera cut to the audience, faces wide-eyed, mouths slightly open, some nodding, others frowning. This was no longer about a single question. It was about control, about who got to define whom. Joy leaned forward now, mirroring his intensity. "So you're saying we shouldn't talk about it at all?" "I'm saying there's a difference between curiosity and confrontation," Chris replied. "And right now, this feels like the latter." Whoopi glanced toward the producer's table off camera, then back to the hosts. The tension was climbing faster than anyone expected. She tried again. "Chris, nobody's questioning your humanity." "But it feels like you're questioning my integrity," he interrupted, then stopped himself, taking a breath. "And that's where I draw the line." The interruption hung in the air like a dropped glass. Joy's eyes narrowed. "I've interviewed thousands of people," she said, her voice cool. "If you feel uncomfortable, maybe that says something." Chris laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "Or maybe it says I'm human," he replied. "And I'm tired of pretending these questions are neutral when they're not." The audience reaction was immediate, applause scattered but growing. The sound echoed off the walls, forcing the producers to lower the volume slightly. Sunny's lips parted in surprise. Whoopi raised an eyebrow, impressed despite herself. Joy held up a hand. "Let's not make this personal." Chris leaned in again, eyes locked on hers. "It became personal the moment you implied I make people feel excluded without ever asking me how I actually treat people." That was the snap. Not a shout. Not a slam of the table. Just a firm, unmistakable shift in tone that signaled Chris Pratt was done playing defense. The easygoing movie star was gone. In his place stood a man drawing a boundary in real time, on live television. Joy exhaled sharply. So what do you want us to do, Chris? Ignore the conversation? I want you to have it honestly, he said. Not with labels. Not with loaded assumptions. Ask me what I believe. Ask me how I live. Don't tell me who I am. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the audience seemed unsure whether to react. The cameras lingered on Chris's face, flushed now, eyes bright with a mix of frustration and resolve. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through him, the risk of this moment fully sinking in. Hollywood didn't always forgive defiance, especially not on a platform this big. Whoopi finally broke the silence. All right, she said slowly. Let's reset. But resets don't always work once the truth is out. Joy nodded stiffly, but there was a crack now, a visible tension in her composure. Fine, she said. Tell us then. What do you want people to understand about you that they don't? Chris hesitated. Just for a second. Then he spoke, his voice quieter, but somehow even more powerful. I want people to understand that I'm more than headlines, he said. More than a caricature. I love people. I try to do right by them. And I'm not perfect, but I'm not the villain some people want me to be. The audience applauded, this time louder, more confident. A few people stood. The sound washed over the table, filling the space Joy's questions had carved out. Joy smiled thinly. No one said you were a villain. Chris met her gaze. You didn't have to. The cameras caught it all, the tension, the pride, the discomfort. Producers whispered frantically off camera, deciding whether to cut to commercial or let the moment breathe. The energy in the room was electric, unpredictable. And everyone watching, at home, in the studio, online, could feel it. This wasn't over. Not even close. The applause faded, but the tension didn't. It clung to the set like static, invisible yet unmistakable, charging every word that followed. Chris sat back in his chair, shoulders squared, breathing measured, as if he were bracing for impact. Across from him, Joy Behar adjusted her posture, the practiced confidence of decades on television now edged with something sharper. Pride challenged, authority questioned. Whoopi tried to steer the conversation forward, her voice smooth but cautious. Chris, you've talked about how fame changes things, she said. Does moments like this make you regret being open at all? Chris turned toward her, grateful for the shift but unwilling to retreat. No, he replied. It makes me more aware. Aware that once a narrative sticks, it's hard to shake, even if it's wrong. Joy interjected quickly. But narratives don't come out of nowhere. Chris looked back at her. Neither do misunderstandings, he said. They're built, brick by brick. A quote here. A headline there. Eventually people stop asking questions. The audience hummed in agreement, a low resonance of recognition. Sunny nodded subtly. Even Whoopi's expression softened, as if she recognized the truth in what he was saying. Joy crossed her legs, tapping her fingers lightly against her mug. You're saying the media is to blame, she said. I'm saying the media has power, Chris answered. And power comes with responsibility. The same one you expect from me. The symmetry of the statement landed hard. Joy opened her mouth, then closed it, recalibrating. The cameras lingered on her face just long enough for viewers to sense the internal calculation. So let me ask you directly, she said. Do you think you've ever contributed to that misunderstanding? Chris didn't dodge. Probably, he admitted. I could have spoken sooner. I could have clarified things. But I also didn't want to turn my life into a debate stage. A hush fell over the audience. This wasn't defiance anymore. This was vulnerability. When you're constantly asked to explain who you are, he continued, you start to feel like nothing you say will ever be enough. So sometimes you stay quiet. Joy tilted her head, her tone softening almost imperceptibly. And you don't see how that silence frustrates people? Chris nodded slowly. I do. But frustration doesn't justify assumptions. The room exhaled together. Whoopi leaned back, folding her arms thoughtfully. That's fair, she said. For a brief moment, it felt like the storm might pass. Like the confrontation had reached its peak and was now settling into reflection. But live television has a way of reigniting embers just when you think the fire is out. Joy leaned forward again. Let's talk about responsibility, she said. Not just yours. Ours. Do you think viewers deserve clarity from you? Chris's jaw tightened. Viewers deserve honesty, he replied. And honesty isn't always neat. Joy smiled, but there was an edge to it. So what's the honest answer then? Are your beliefs at odds with inclusivity? The question cut cleanly, surgically. The audience reacted instantly, gasps, whispers, heads snapping toward Chris. The camera zoomed in, catching the flash of irritation in his eyes. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked down at the table, at the faint reflection of the studio lights in his mug. In that pause, everything hung in the balance: his reputation, the tone of the show, the way this moment would be replayed and dissected online within minutes. Then he looked up. "No," he said clearly. "They're not." Joy raised an eyebrow. "Care to explain?" Chris leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "I believe in treating people with dignity," he said. Full stop. I don't think that belief belongs to one political party, one ideology, or one group. And I reject the idea that my faith, or anyone's, automatically makes them intolerant. A wave of reaction rolled through the audience. Applause erupted, louder than before. A few cheers broke out. Producers glanced nervously at one another. Joy held up her hand again. "All right, but you understand why people are skeptical." Chris's voice hardened. "I understand skepticism," he said. "What I don't accept is being prejudged." That was the snap everyone felt. Not explosive, but final. A line drawn with quiet certainty. Whoopi jumped in, sensing the urgency. "We're running short on time," she said, half smiling. "And clearly this is a bigger conversation." Chris nodded. "It is," he agreed. "And it's one worth having, without assuming the worst in each other." Joy sighed, leaning back in her chair. For the first time since the interview began, she looked tired. "I'll say this," she said. "I may not agree with everything you say, but I respect you for saying it." The audience responded with applause, some relieved, some conflicted. Chris inclined his head slightly. "I appreciate that. But beneath the surface, the damage and the impact had already been done. Social media was lighting up in real time. Clips were being cut. Headlines were being drafted. The narrative machine was already spinning, hungry for its angle. Chris could feel it. The weight of the moment. He knew this exchange would follow him long after he left the studio. And as the segment edged toward its final minutes, one thing became clear to everyone watching. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a reckoning, and the fallout was about to be massive. The cameras cut to commercial moments later, but the energy in the studio didn't fade with the red light. It lingered, buzzing through whispered conversations, hurried producer instructions, and the low murmur of an audience that knew it had just witnessed something rare. When the show resumed, the smiles were tighter, the banter shorter, as if everyone were carefully stepping around the emotional debris left behind. Chris sat quietly now, hands folded, his expression calm but distant. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by the heavy awareness of consequence. He had said what he said. There was no taking it back. Across the table, Joy Behar shuffled her notes, avoiding his eyes for a beat longer than usual. The exchange hadn't ended in victory or defeat. It had ended in exposure, and that was far more unsettling. As the final applause rolled and the credits loomed, Chris stood, thanked the hosts politely, and waved to the audience. Some stood to clap. Others watched in silence, absorbing it all. Backstage, the atmosphere was thick. A producer offered a strained smile. Someone muttered, "That got real." Chris nodded, already feeling the weight of his phone buzzing in his pocket. Outside the studio, the reaction exploded. Within minutes, clips flooded social media. One angle showed Chris leaning forward, eyes blazing. Another captured Joy's raised eyebrow, her measured pause. Captions screamed in bold letters. "Chris Pratt snaps on the View." Tense on-air clash leaves audience stunned. Live TV moment no one expected. The internet did what it always does, picked sides. Supporters praised Chris for finally standing up for himself, calling the moment honest, overdue, even brave. He handled that with class. One comment read, like tens of thousands of times, "Not angry, just done being misrepresented." Others weren't as forgiving. Critics accused him of being defensive, of dodging responsibility, of turning accountability into victimhood. Threads grew longer, angrier, more polarized by the hour. Joy Behar trended too. Some hailed her for asking the tough questions. Others accused her of pushing too hard, of turning conversation into confrontation. Think pieces appeared before sunset. Body language experts weighed in. PR analysts dissected every pause, every inflection, every glance. By nightfall, the moment had outgrown the show itself. Entertainment news ran the clip on loop. Late-night hosts joked about it with cautious humor. Hashtags battled for dominance. And somewhere in all of it, the original question about beliefs, inclusivity, and understanding was both amplified and drowned out at the same time. Chris, at home now, watched the noise from a distance. He didn't tweet. He didn't post a statement. He sat quietly, replaying the moment in his mind. Not the applause, not the tension, but the instant he chose honesty over comfort. Whatever came next, that choice was his to own. The next morning, The View opened with a brief acknowledgement. Yesterday's conversation sparked strong reactions, Whoopi said carefully. And we welcome dialogue, even when it's uncomfortable. Joy nodded beside her, expression neutral, professional. The show moved on. But the audience didn't. Because moments like that don't disappear. They linger in comment sections, in group chats, in late-night debates between friends. They resurface whenever someone feels misunderstood, cornered, or finally pushed to speak. And whether viewers saw Chris Pratt as defiant, vulnerable, or somewhere in between, one thing was undeniable. They felt it. They were inside it. And that's why this moment mattered. Now it's your turn. Did Chris Pratt speak his truth? Or did he dodge accountability? Was Joy Behar holding him responsible? Or pushing too far? Drop your opinion in the comments below. Let your voice be heard. And if you want more explosive, emotional, behind-the-scenes stories that pull you straight into the heart of the moment, make sure you subscribe to The Truth Narrator. Because the truth doesn't whisper. It confronts.